Hello, my name is Krista Mullins, a program consultant in the Office of Assessment and Accountability. Welcome to the Inclusions of Special Populations Training 703 KAR 5:070. This is Module 1 of 7 that make up this training series. This training must be completed prior to providing accommodations for any state-required assessments. Please ensure to review all 7 modules for the complete training. The first module represents inclusion. Inclusion means to do just as it sounds, to include. Inclusion provides equal access to opportunities and resources and makes sure conditions are in place for each person to reach their full potential. In this part of the training, we will look at students who are included in state assessments, those who are not, and the definition of accommodations. The last area we will dive into is the 3 options for participation in a state assessment. The first thing I want to direct your attention to on this slide is the arrow at the top of the page. The arrow reflects the location this information is found in the actual regulation document. Even though this training provides an in-depth look at all parts of the Inclusion of Special Populations regulation, it does not give every detail like the actual regulation. If you need to know more, go to the regulation and look for the page number. There are 6 sections covered in this regulation. Every section represents a different student group and the services they are eligible to receive under specific conditions. The sections represented include students with IEPs, students who speak English as a second language, or may have specific access to a program service plan, and some may also require an IEP as well. Students who have a 504 plan or a medical emergency occurs and an accommodation is necessary. Students who are in an alternative or state agency setting. Students who receive instruction in home or hospital settings. Students who participate in the Kentucky Alternate Assessment. Most all students are covered in this regulation in some way. However, there are some groups of students that this regulation does not represent. Those are students who may age out at 21 years of age or older, or are students who are considered part-time students and may be enrolled in a Kentucky public school 6 hours or less per day. The last group would be students who are enrolled in a general education program or GED that is not part of a Kentucky public school system. The definition of accommodations as they relate to state assessments is to provide support to students during instruction and assist in student demonstration of skill and content achievement during assessments. It should be noted that accommodations may look different between instruction and assessment. We will discuss accommodations that relate to state assessments. Accommodations provide support but do not reduce learning expectations. Accommodations are individualized and specifically designed to aid learning. Not all accommodations can be faded over time because not all students will be able to move toward greater independence due to the nature of the disability. An accommodation should never be provided as a means to give a student an unfair advantage over their peers or take something away. It is meant to provide the same level opportunity as everyone else, to include in the same manner. A student's IEP team or Admissions and Release Committee, ARC, must meet annually to determine a student's least restrictive environment and learning plan. The team will use data-driven results, observations, formative and summative assessment, as well as other determining factors to place a student and determine accommodations for state assessments. There are 3 options for inclusion in a state assessment. They are with no accommodations, which means an accommodation is not needed or the student is not eligible at the time of testing. Those with accommodations mean that the ARC or IEP team have met and developed the annual plan to include those accommodation types permitted for the student to utilize on the state assessment. The last option is alternate assessment, which means even with access to the necessary accommodations, the student is still unable to access the general curriculum in a manner equivalent to their peers. The ARC or IEP team would then complete the participation guidelines for the Kentucky Alternate Assessment and revisit their eligibility for that participation level on a year-to-year basis. A student's ARC is responsible for determining which accommodations, if any, are necessary to provide individualized supports. This is one of 6 slides in this training that has been designed to highlight specific ways to try and reduce an allegation when administering a state assessment. These slides do not eliminate the chance for an allegation to occur, but the purpose behind them are to spotlight areas that the Office of Assessment and Accountability, along with the Office of Legal Services or allegation investigators, might see on a regular basis. The first allegation prevention best practice tip is to always make sure students who receive accommodation with an IEP 504 or program service plan have access to said accommodation routinely during instruction. If a plan changes near a testing window, there should be documentation to support the change. If the accommodation has been on a plan for an entire school year, it should be made available to the student during that time as well. The team monitoring the plan should be reviewing accommodations regularly to make sure they are appropriate and necessary for inclusion. The plan must be current or up to date, and a very important area we often see is that any information pulled from IC to create a roster for SDRR may not pull a student if the plan is unlocked. If someone does not work with a student on a day-to-day basis, they may not recognize that the student is missing from a roster and in turn will not provide the appropriate accommodations. This leads to an allegation. This is the first check for understanding in this training. There are 7 total throughout and are provided to share the information that has been represented in the section of information leading up to the check. Question 1 reads, all special populations are included in the state-required assessment and accountability programs. True or false? The answer is true. Question 2 asks, what is the age in Kentucky when students age out and are no longer eligible to receive services? Is it A, 19 years old, B, 25 years old, C, 21 years old, or D, 23 years old? If you said C, 21 years old, you answered correctly. Question 3 states, there is a significant difference between an accommodation and a modification. Is that true or false? If you answered true, you are correct. Question 4 asks, what are the 3 testing options for students eligible to receive services in Kentucky? A, no accommodations, with accommodations, alternate assessment. B, partial accommodations, permanent accommodations, due process. C, inclusion, non-inclusion 504s. And D, IEPs, 504s, and PSPs. If you answered A, you answered correctly. Question 5. If a state assessment is modified, it can change the intent of the assessment item and invalidate test questions. True or false? The correct answer is true. It can change the intent of the assessment item and invalidate test questions. This concludes Module 1 of 7 of the Inclusion of Special Populations training. Please review all 7 modules to complete the training. If you have any questions about anything we discussed, please feel free to contact our office by emailing dacinfo@education.ky.gov or by calling 502-564-4394.